All right, ladies, welcome to our study session for tonight. So we're going to go over ICD-10-CM chapters 11 through 15. And then we will just walk through like we have in the previous weeks and go through some of our questions. So everyone has their ICD-10-CM book in front of them. I currently am using the 2024 ICD-10-CM for physicians for decision health. So if you have a different version, your page numbers may be different. If I call out a page number, or if I say it's like in the middle column, yours might be a little bit different. So I usually try not to do too much of page numbers and column calling on here, just because I know everyone has multiple different versions. And so that way it doesn't cause confusion. However, if you do need some assistance in finding it, then you can put in the chat what version of the book you have. And if someone else has that version of the book, then you can they can call out numbers and things that way for you. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I'll make this a little bit bigger. So we have number 1. If we have a provider documents that the patient has chronic kidney disease, stage 5, as well as end-stage renal disease, what ICD-10 code or codes should we report? So we have an ICD-10 guideline that is pertinent to when hypertension and other, sorry, this isn't hypertension. I was thinking of that one. We have a guideline that specifies if they indicate that there is a stage of chronic kidney disease as well as end-stage renal disease that are present, we should only code one of the two. So which one should we only code based on our guidelines? So we'll go look at chapter 14 of our ICD-10 guidelines. And then in the first paragraph, or that first section, then it states that if both a stage of chronic kidney disease and end-stage renal disease are present, we should only assign what code. So we've got some answers in the chat. We'll give everybody another couple seconds to flip to that guideline and give their answer as well. Okay, yep. In 18.6, so we should only report the end-stage renal disease. So we will code in 18.6. Okay, let's move on to number 2. Here we have a female patient that has osteoarthritis that is localized in the left hip joint due to senile osteoporosis. So if we are coding in our alphabetic index, our main term would be osteoarthritis. Underneath osteoarthritis, we will go to secondary, because our osteoarthritis is due to senile osteoporosis. So it's a secondary osteoarthritis. And then our anatomic location is the hip. And that gives us M16.7. We need to flip back to our tabular to further expand. So M16.7, actually, hang on, I think we don't. My alphabetic index says that there is additional characters that are required. But M16.7, which we should go back to the tabular and verify anyways. But our osteoarthritis localized in the left hip is going to be M16.7. And then what else should we code? You can throw it in the chat if you think you have what our other condition is that we should code. So we've got our osteoarthritis localized to the left hip. That's secondary. What is it secondary to? It's secondary to our senile osteoporosis. So in our alphabetic index, we will go to osteoporosis. So the first code was osteoarthritis. Here we are coding osteoporosis. And then we will look at senile. And then that tells us to look at another term underneath osteoporosis. So it tells us to look at osteoporosis age-related. And then, since we do not have any current pathological fracture that is present with the senile osteoporosis, then we should only code the M81.0. Because there is no current pathological fracture, so we should stop at that default code, which is the M81.0. So since we have those two conditions, our answer is letter A. Any questions on that one? Okay. So it looks like we have a question. Let me get you off of mute so that you can ask that question. I just got to find your name in the list here. Okay, what's your question, hon?
So the question doesn't say anything about age related. I know
Right.
the quote. Okay.
So in the alphabetic index, if we go to osteoporosis and then senile, it tells us to look at osteoporosis age related. So because our alphabetic index is telling us that we should see osteoporosis age related, then we can use that age related for that senile osteoporosis. It's just the synonym. Does that make sense?
I think so, but I'm not able, I can locate osteoporosis, but I cannot locate senile here.
What version of your ICD-10 book do you have?
2024.
Who's your publisher? Is it AAPC? Is
Yes.
it okay? I do not have a 2024 version of AAPC. But underneath osteoporosis, it should be in a second column. It should be in a separate column from that main term.
Yes, I
But
see now.
I
I
was gonna
get
say
it.
it's directly underneath specified type. Yep. So next to senile, it says C osteoporosis age related.
Yes, I see. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Oh, Puny, do you have another one? Do you have another question, hun? Okay. All right. So number 3 we have a patient is having surgery to repair a recurrent left inguinal hernia without obstruction. So our main term is going to be our condition, which is the hernia. So we will go to main term hernia in the alphabetic index. Underneath hernia, we will go to inguinal, because that's our type. Underneath inguinal, we will then go to unilateral because it's only present on the left-hand side. Since we do not have obstruction, then we will just go down to recurrent. So following that path, going from hernia, inguinal, unilateral, recurrent, what code does that give us? Again, you can throw it in the chat if you want to type out the code, if you want to put the letter number or the letter option of the four choices that we have here. Okay, so we've got K40.90. When it says K40.90 on that one, make sure you're going down to recurrent. The K40.90 is for not specified as recurrent. Yep. So I've got a couple for letter C that is for K40.91. Does everybody see that it is K40.91? And then once we go verify that code in the alpha or in the tabular, K40.91, our code description, I'm flipping to it now, is unilateral inguinal hernia without obstruction or gangrene recurrent. So that gives us all of our details that we have here for the recurrent left inguinal hernia without obstruction. Any questions on that one? Okay. Number 4, we have what ICD-10 codes are reported on the maternal record for a delivery of triplets that are all live born at 32 weeks of pregnancy. So first thing we're going to do is report our pregnancy, because we know that our chapter 15 codes for pregnancy are going to always take our sequencing priority. So main term, we will go to pregnancy. Underneath pregnancy, because they aren't indicating that there are any complications of pregnancy, right? We are going to go to pregnancy for triplets. So we'll go pregnancy triplet. Now, because we do not have information about the number of amniotic sacs, the number of placentas, or anything along those lines, then we will just go with our default code, which is the O30.10. We have to go expand that back in the back. So let's flip to O30.10. And then we need to determine what trimester we are in. So if we are 32 weeks pregnant, which trimester is that going to be in? First, second, or third. If you can't remember the number of weeks for each one of your trimesters, if you flip to the very beginning of your chapter 15 codes, then you have a note at the very, very beginning that indicates your first trimester, your second trimester, and your third trimester with your corresponding weeks. So if we are 32 weeks pregnant, which trimester will we be in? Third. Yep. So our code for the triplet pregnancy for third trimester is 030.103. Okay. Next, we have to report the outcome of delivery because we're talking about the delivery itself for this situation as well. So our main term or main phrase is going to be outcome of delivery. Underneath outcome of delivery, because we have triplets, it's going to be multiple births. They are all live born. So what should our code be for all live born triplets? Again, you go to outcome of delivery, multiple births, all live born, and then triplets. Anybody have any guesses that, okay, so got somebody that said A, so I'm assuming we're going to go with the Z37.51. So Z3751 is our, yep, is the triplets that were all live born. So our last code that we have to code should be what? Not the code itself, but what in the scenario would our last code be that we should report? The weeks of gestation. Yep, perfect. So we've got 32 weeks of pregnancy. So we would go to pregnancy once again in the alphabetic index. And then there should be a weeks of gestation. I'm going to show you guys a little trick here once we get to the alphabetic index for pregnancy and then weeks of gestation. So if you take a look at 32 weeks, our code is Z3A.32, right? So 32 weeks is 0.32. If you look at the list that's in your alphabetic index, anywhere from 8 weeks to 42 weeks, your number of weeks should correspond with the fourth and fifth characters after your decimal. So if you're 8 weeks, it's Z3A.08. If you're 21 weeks, it's Z3A.21. If you're 39 weeks, it's Z3A.39. Okay. If you're less than 8 weeks or greater than 42 weeks, then your characters or your numbers after the decimal will be different. but anywhere from 8 weeks to 42 weeks, it should be the same with that with the weeks corresponding. So any questions on number 4 on any of the 3 codes for either the pregnancy of triplets, the outcome of delivery, or the weeks of gestation? Okay. Let's look at number 5. We have a patient was referred to the radiology department for chronic low back pain. The radiology report indicated that there was no marrow abnormality that was identified, and the conus medullaris was unremarkable. Additional findings include L4, L5. There is minor diffusely bulging annulus at L4, L5. The small focal disc bulge is seen in far lateral position on the left at L4, L5 within the neural foramen. No definite encroachment on the existing nerve root at this site is seen, and no significant spinal stenosis is identified. At L5S1, there is a diffusely bulging annulus at L5S1 with a small focal disc bulge centrally at this level. There is a minor disc desiccation and disc space narrowing at L5S1. There is no significant spinal stenosis seen at L5S1, and the final diagnosis is minor degenerative disc disease at L4, L5, and at L5S1. So what ICD-10 code or codes should we report? So our final diagnosis is the minor degenerative disc disease, right? So we will go to degeneration in the alphabetic index. Because that's what we're coding is for that degenerative disc disease. So we'll go to degeneration. Underneath degeneration, we are looking at intervertebral discs because we're seeing it at L4, L5, and L5S1. So in between those vertebrae, so intervertebral. And then the first section that we're looking at is lumbar, right? Because our L4, L5 is within the lumbar region. Is there any indication within our scenario that we have either myelopathy or neuritis, radiculitis, radiculopathy, or sciatica? Okay. So there's not. Yep. So we're going to use M51.36. So let's go back in our alphabetic index and make sure that the M51.36 is correct. Make sure there's not any typos in our alphabetic index. So M51.36 is going to be other intervertebral disc degeneration, lumbar region. So our M51.36 is for, again, that lumbar region. Okay. So now we need to look for that degenerative disc disease between L5 and S1. So we'll go back to degeneration, intervertebral. And then from there, we're going to look for lumbosacral because We are at L5S1, so the lumbar and the sacral, where they join together, is known as the lumbosacral region. Again, there's no indication that there's neuritis, radiculitis, radiculopathy, or sciatica. So it's going to be M51.37. Any questions on that one? Okay. Number 6, we have a 55-year-old has developed a pressure ulcer on her right hip. The base of the ulcer is covered in eschar, and the provider documents that the stage of the ulcer cannot be determined. So our main term in our alphabetic index is going to be ulcer. It is a pressure ulcer. So we'll go down to pressure. And then our anatomic location is right hip. So we'll go to hip. And that gives us L89.2. So we'll go back in our tabular to L89.2. And what code should we use for the right hip where the stage cannot be determined? Okay, so we've got L89.219. Got a couple of people saying L89.219. So L89.219 is saying that it's an unspecified stage. So they attempted to find our stage, but it is unable to be determined. So that's going to be unstageable, not unspecified. So it should be L89.210 because it cannot be determined. Does that make sense? For those that had answered originally with the 219? Any questions on that one of unspecified versus unable or unstageable? Okay. Number 7, we have a woman with a long history of rectocele, has a perineal scarring from multiple episiotomies, and she has developed a rectovaginal fistula with perineal body relaxation. She has a transperineal repair with that perineal body reconstruction and implication of the levator muscles in order to correct those conditions. So our first condition that we're going to code, actually, before I tell you what we're going to code first, question. Should we code the history of the rectocele? Or should we code the rectocele itself? Any thoughts, yes or no? And okay. So Tanisha says both. So if there's a history of the rectocele, should we code it as a current condition? No. So because it's a history of, and we cannot say that it is current, then we should not report it. So I'm just going to cross that out. So out of sight, out of mind. So what we need to code is the rectovaginal fistula, because that is what the patient has developed as a result of the perineal scarring and the multiple episiotomy. So the rectovaginal fistula is what's bringing the patient in today. So alphabetic index, we will go to fistula. Underneath fistula, we should go to rectovaginal. And what ICD-10 code should we use for a rectovaginal fistula? Yep, N82.3. Okay. Now, we also need to code the perineal scarring, because that perineal scarring is still present and it has caused the rectovaginal fistula. So that's why we should code it second. So we'll go to main term scar. Now, underneath scar, there is not an option for the perineum. What is another word for perineum that we can use? Anybody have any guesses of what our term would be that we would use, since perineal or perineum is not an option underneath the main term scar? Yep. Labia is one of them. Vulva is another. Those are essentially, those are the same area. Vaginal would not be it, because the vagina is going to be an internal organ, whereas the vulva is the external organ. Yep. So it would be of the vulva or of the labia. So that would give us N90.89 for that perineal scarring. So any questions on that one? Yes. Yeah. So it gives you the same code, because those terms can be used interchangeably. Yep. So the vulva and the labia are going to be the same areas. It just gives you multiple options to look it up. It just doesn't give you the perineum or the perineal area. Yep. Okay. Let's move on to number 8. So we have a 70-year-old female patient that presents with a complaint of left knee pain with weight-bearing activities. She is also developing pain at rest. She denies any recent injury. There is pain with stair climbing and startup pain. AP, lateral, and sunrise views of the left knee are ordered and interpreted. And the diagnosis is left knee pain secondary to an underlying primary degenerative arthritis. So, the big question, our diagnosis is left knee pain, right? But it's secondary to our primary degenerative arthritis. Do we code both or do we code one or the other? And if we only code one, which one do we code? You can raise your hand and come off mute. You can type it in. So is our left knee pain also coded with the primary degenerative arthritis? Is it both, one or the other? Okay, so we've got some say the primary arthritis, some say both, some say left knee pain. Okay. Left knee pain and then primary after. Okay. So if we have arthritis, are we expected to have joint pain with that arthritis? Do we think that's a typical sign or symptom of the arthritis? Right. So our guidelines tell us that if we have signs and symptoms that are an integral part of a condition, then we should only code the condition and not the associated signs and symptoms. So in this scenario, we have that underlying primary degenerative arthritis, and that left knee pain is just a sign or symptom of that degenerative arthritis. So we should only code the arthritis. Does that make sense? Anybody have any questions on that? Okay. So we will look up arthritis. Underneath arthritis, then we'll go to degenerative. And then that tells us to look where instead. It tells us to see something else. What does it tell us to see? Osteoarthritis. Yep. So we'll go to osteoarthritis. Now, is so the osteoarthritis is our primary. So we'll go to primary underneath osteoarthritis. And then our anatomic location is the knee, right? So that tells us M17.1 because it is not bilateral. It's only unilateral because it's only in the left. So we'll go to M17.1. And then what is our ICD-10 code for the left knee osteoarthritis for primary? Yep. M17.12. Okay. Any questions for number 8? Perfect. Let's roll to number 9. So we've got a 40-year-old woman who is 25 weeks pregnant with her second child is seeing her obstetrician. She is worried about decreased fetal movement. During the examination, the obstetrician detects bradycardia within the fetus. Okay. So first and foremost, we need to code our pregnancy code, right? So we'll go to main term pregnancy. Underneath pregnancy, the patient is having a complication, right? Because there's that decreased fetal movement, and that complication is the bradycardia. So we will do pregnancy complicated by. Now, there's not a bradycardia option in the alphabetic index. So we will look underneath complicated, and then you will go to abnormal, and then you have a fetal heart rate or rhythm. Does everybody see that? So pregnancy complicated by abnormal fetal heart rate or rhythm. So what code does that give us so far that we need to further expand in the alphabetic index or in the tabular? O36.83. Yep. Perfect. So let's go back to O36.83. So our 6th character is going to be for the trimester. So we're 25 weeks pregnant. So what is our trimester for this one? First, second, or third? Yep, our second trimester. So then that gives us so far 036.832. And then flipping back to the beginning of our 036 category, our 7th character should be what? Okay. So Ellie, if you look at that box, it says up at the top, says your second sentence, it says your 7th character 0 is for single gestations or for multiple gestations where the fetus is unspecified. So because here it doesn't state that we have multiple fetuses, we're going to go with the 7th character 0 for not applicable because the number of fetuses that are here is not applicable because there's only one. Does that make sense? So we're going to use 036.820. Yep. So I can explain that again. So does everyone see the box underneath your 036 category that contains your 7 characters? Does everybody physically see that box? Because in order for me to explain it, I need you to see that box. Does anybody not see it? Okay. So in that box, you have a little bit of a paragraph above the 7 characters. It says one of the following characters, 7 characters is to be assigned for each code underneath O category or category 036. The 7th character 0 is for gestations, or so I'm sorry, is for single gestations and multiple gestations where the fetus is unspecified. So you would only use, or you would use the seventh character 0 in two scenarios. Either it's a single gestation, right? Which is in this case, because it's a single gestation, there's not multiple pregnancies or there's not multiple fetuses. And then you would also use it if there are multiple fetuses, but they do not specify which fetus it is. So, Milvia, we would not use the P code because P codes are only for infants after birth. So, in this scenario, we are not coding for the baby. We are coding the pregnancy that is complicated by the bradycardia within the fetus. So remember, O codes are for your pregnancies. P codes are going to be for your infant after birth. So your P codes should never be used on the mom's record, and your O codes should never be used on the baby's record. Okay. Does everybody understand why we're using the O36.83 and then the seventh character 0 for the single gestation? Puny, do you still have a question, or did that answer your question? Okay. So yes, the character 1 means that if you have twins and they indicate fetus 1, or if you have triplets and they indicate fetus 1, so on and so forth. So you should never use character 1 if there's a single gestation, or if there's multiple gestations, they don't specify which fetus. Okay. So any more questions on that before we move on to the next? Oh, sorry, didn't mean to scroll. Before we move on to the next code in this one. Okay. So the next one that we need to code is our 40-year-old woman that is pregnant. So that is considered an elderly pregnancy, or also what's known as oh my gosh, the word just like totally went away from me. But anything that any woman that is over 40 is considered an elderly pregnancy. I know that sounds crazy, but at 40, then your body starts to change. You're not able to carry the pregnancy as well. Some people can, but the risks of being pregnant 40 years and older are going to increase. So we're going to have to code pregnancy and then complicated by elderly. And then the two options that you have are multigravata and primigravata. So primigravata, geriatric. Yes, Lauren, thank you. I knew there was a word and I just like I couldn't think of what it was. Thank you, Lauren. I like I said, I knew it was there and it just wouldn't come to me. Um, so multigravata is going to mean like second pregnancy, third pregnancy, and so on and so forth. Primigravata is going to be if they are a geriatric pregnancy or an elderly pregnancy with their first pregnancy. So in this case, because this is her second child, we are going to be multigravata. So that's going to give us O09.52. Let's go back to 009.52. And then again, the difference between our 6 characters, 1, 2, 3, and 9 are going to be our trimester. So we've already figured out that 25 weeks is our second trimester. So that's going to give us the 009.522. So even though they're not telling us, without physically telling us that this is a geriatric pregnancy or an elderly pregnancy, because they are giving us the age of the mom, which is 40 years old, we know that 40 and over is considered that elderly or that geriatric pregnancy. Yes, your weeks of gestation will typically always be last. So in the alphabetic index, you will look up pregnancy, complicated by, elderly, and then depending on whether or not it is first or second child, you'll have primigravida or multigravida. So pregnancy, complicated by, elderly, and then either primigravida or multigravida. So to look up our weeks of gestation again, if you don't remember the rule of the last 2 digits, you will go to pregnancy, weeks of gestation, and then we are 25 weeks. So primigravida is going to be the first pregnancy. Multigravida is going to mean that they are on their second, third, fourth. They've had multiple pregnancies. Okay. So again, we've got our pregnancy that's complicated by that abnormal fetal heartbeat, which is our 036.8320 because it's in our second trimester. We've got the 009.522 for the elderly pregnancy. And then our weeks of gestation, Z3A.25. Any questions on number 9? Okay. So if you haven't had a chance to go through and do the last 2, there's actually 11 questions this week. I lost track of count apparently at some point when I was putting them all together. So you can go through and do the last 2 on your own if you haven't done them already. And then your answers are at the bottom. So you can check, and then you've got your rationale down there as well. So if you do not get it correct, then you've got your rationale down there to help you understand. Okay. Any questions, anything that you want to chat about for the last like 60 seconds that we've got? Anybody have anything that they want to say? Milvia, did you have a question? Is that what you're saying yes to? Okay. The guideline about unstageable for the pressure ulcers. So it's not necessarily, let me see if there is a guideline as far as the differences between unstageable and unspecified. Let me look. So we need to go to chapter 12. Yes. Okay. So if you go to chapter 12, underneath letter A, so in your guidelines, then if you go to chapter 12, letter A for pressure ulcer stage codes. Number 2, that is for unstageable pressure ulcers. Do you see that? Are you following me through the guidelines? Okay. So you go to your unstageable pressure ulcers, and it states there that the assignment of the code for an unstageable pressure ulcer should be based on your clinical documentation. Codes that are used for pressure ulcers whose stages cannot be clinically determined. So it should not be confused with your code for unspecified. where there is just no documentation regarding the stage of the pressure ulcer, then at that point you should use your unspecified versus unstageable. Does that help? Okay, perfect. Excludes, so CUNY excludes one versus excludes two. Excludes one means that they cannot be coded together. So you can either have one or the other, but you should never code the two codes together. Excludes two means that you can code them together, but you need two separate codes and it's not a combo code. Is it Sylvia? Am I saying it right? If I say Sylvia, is that right? Okay, Sylvia. I'm always so paranoid that I'm gonna like pronounce somebody's name wrong. Sylvia, the materials are in the Discord chat. Underneath the Discord chat, there is a channel for the weekly meetings. I think it's called Weekly Schedule. Let me pull it up here real quick. Where's my Discord? Sorry, I'm trying to pull it up here real quick so I can show you. I can visually show you because I know that I am. Okay, yes. Underneath the meeting schedule, there's a thread that's called Files for Weekly Study Group. If you click on that link for the Google Drive, then it will open up a folder and all of the files are going to be in there. I will start to upload the recordings in there as well. I can't promise how long they'll be available because I don't know how much space I will have in there. But I will upload them for as long as I can. But the files for the questions will be in there longer. So if I have to delete anything, I'm going to delete the recordings and not the files. So all of the files will be in that Google Drive folder. Okay. You're very welcome. Absolutely. Let me make sure that I answered all of the questions. I think I did. If you have any questions still and I wasn't able to answer your questions, then feel free to put those in the chat in Discord and I will get to those. But thanks everybody. Sorry, I have the hiccups. Thanks everybody for a good study session tonight. Next week, we will go over chapters 16 through 22. And then after next week, we will move on to CPT. So we'll finish up ICD-10 next week and then move on to CPT after that. You all have a good rest of your evening and I will chat with you guys next week.